Today we're going to look at the mandible, which is the bone that makes up our lower jaw. Problems and pains in the jaw are quite common, and the cause of this dysfunction is wrapped up in the general problem of poor postural habits. The first thing we can take note of is that the mandible is the only readily movable part of the skull. It's actually not uncommon for people to not fully understand this. If you're not familiar with the anatomy, it's quite possible that you might think you have an upper and lower jaw that both move apart and come together. But that is not the case in man. This does matter because you will find that many people, for instance, chew in a way that demonstrates that they believe the top jaw can be lifted. In reality, to lift the upper jaw, you will have to pull your head back and tip the back of your head down. So if this is not something you've thought about before, the next time you're chewing food, see if your habit is to lower and lift only your lower jaw. Or do you find that you lift the upper jaw by throwing your head back? We also open our mouth to speak or sing, and again, it's very common for people to pull their head back and down to do this. If you impersonate an opera singer, the first thing you might do is throw your head back and push your lower sternum forward. These subconscious conceptions of how certain movements should be performed can exist in our mind without us even realizing it. Last episode, I brought up a problem with opening the jaw, which is that it seems that if we just lower the mandible to open the mouth, that the mandible will come back and crowd the larynx, something we don't want. Let's model that movement just so we know what we're talking about. If you take a pencil or any small straight object, we can imagine that it's the back of the jaw. The lower end will be the mandibular angle. That's the spot that we looked at before at the turn of the jawbone. While it's not uncommon for people to keep the back of their mandible straight up and down like this, optimally we would like the mandibular angle to be forward compared to the top part of the bone, so the back of the jaw will be angled a bit. Now let's model opening the jaw. We see that the jaw comes back towards where the throat and larynx would be. However, the temporomandibular joint, which is the joint that connects the mandible to the skull, is not a hinge joint. In order for us to open our mouth, the mandible actually slides forward. There's this notch just in front of the mandibular head called the articular tubercle. The mandible slides forward and down towards the edge of this tubercle and allows the mouth to open, even very widely, without crowding the larynx. Let's model that so we have an idea of how it works. If we hold the pencil a little bit lower, we can imagine pulling the jaw forward and down inside the joint to start. So we pull the jaw forward and down and then allow it to open. This way, though the mandible will still come back, since we got that forward movement first, we will no longer be crunching the throat. This also means that when we close our mouth, we need to bring the mandible back and up. Generally, we don't want to reduce the distance between the chin and the throat. In order to stretch the muscles and fascia in this area, we want to keep a good distance between the front of the jaw and the larynx. We also want to keep the bottom of the jaw up. That is, we do not want to drop the chin or the jaw. We don't, however, want to lift the chin relative to the mandibular angle, as that will tip the head back and down. We'll look at that more closely in a moment, but first I'd like to explain why the dropping of the chin is so common, especially when we're trying to adjust our torso. What we're trying to orchestrate with an adjustment is the lengthening of multiple parts of the body simultaneously. Lengthening in multiple ways introduces tension into fascia and muscles that wasn't there before. This due tension is necessary for efficient use of the musculature. But our feeling sense is not used to this tension. This due tension in the body feels strange, and if we allow our subconscious guidance to take over, we will make movements that reduce the tension. That is, we will make shortening movements, because it's shortening movements that will get rid of this feeling. When people lift their ribcage up away from their pelvis to lengthen their torso, often they will bend their knees if they're standing, because relaxing at the knee reduces the feeling of tension. It's actually fairly easy to straighten your lower back if you allow yourself to bend your knees, but that's of no use to us. We don't want lengthening in one area that is gained by shortening in another. We ultimately need to go down the harder route, where we lengthen both the torso and the legs, including the knees. You'll find that similarly, when someone lifts their ribcage up away from their pelvis, they will often drop their chin. This is because lifting the ribcage will stretch both the back and front of the torso, And another way to break that tension is to drop the chin, which is essentially shortening the upper torso and neck area. The first thing to think when dealing with this problem is that you want your mandible to go up. It often won't be enough to just say you don't want it to come down if it's your habit to pull the jaw down. So instead, lift the mandible. But we can refine how we lift the mandible by saying that we want to lift the mandibular angle faster than the chin. We want to lift both, but we want the mandibular angle to go up faster. This will produce some of the same lengthening at the back of the head and neck that a chin tuck will, but without the irrational retraction of the chin. This idea can of course be added to the procedures we've looked at earlier in this series, as well as in the series about the torso, legs, and arms. If you have a receded chin, you can coordinate these directions with moving the upper lip spot and the corner of the eye forward. If you have more of an underbite, you will need to emphasize the corner of the eye forward. But remember, the head as a whole needs to be going forward and up. If you add on one and then another movement, and you find yourself going down or back with your head, you need to regroup and reconsider what you're doing. Come back to the torso, as that is what will give you the stable basis to reorient your head. In the next episode, we'll start to look at the muscles that make up the structure of the face and head. A phrase that is sometimes thrown around in the Alexander technique world is the smile behind the eyes. Singers also use a concept called the singer's smile. This so-called inner smile is known to improve the quality of the voice, which is why singers use it. That's of interest to us because typically if something is improving your voice, it's doing so because it's improving the condition of your throat, mouth, or body generally. What is this smile behind the eyes? And what directions can we use to produce this effect in a rational and repeatable way? Join me next episode and we'll see how the muscles of the face affect the structure of the oral and nasal cavities.